So Craig, last week we talked a bit about like motivation and how motivation sort of underlies a lot of these leadership theories, because ultimately, two of the big things leaders are trying to do is just, make good decisions and then motivate others to follow through on it. But the problem with just sort of identifying, what are the psychological needs, for example, it doesn't actually really tell us like what does a good leader actually look like on the ground. So I guess the goal this week and next week is to kind of walk through sort of some models of leadership that have been shown to be really good predictors of the success of the team and the motivation of the followers and whatnot. So if it's all right with you, this week we'll sort of focus on transformational leadership as an idea and see what that actually looks like in high performance settings. How's that sound?
Yeah, sounds great.
So let's kind of start where this came from, because it sort of came as a response to what some people call like transactional leadership, or the leadership where it's like, if you do this, then I'll get you X result, or like it's been very much like a reward and punishment based kind of leadership. And I guess like I'm not sure whether that sort of reward and punishment approach is still around, whether you still see it, or whether that's sort of so antiquated it's kind of gone. But like, what's your take on how prevalent transactional leadership is?
I think in sport it's predominant. I think
Really?
I think the use of positional power and that do it this way, and if it doesn't go our way, is I would say predominant. That the old style. I actually wrote something recently and said that I think leadership style in sport is still around the industrial age, around the early 1900s, and that's what we're talking about here, where if things aren't done properly, then the leader will cause problems for those following. So there's definitely, in some of the instances that I work in and consult into, I see a massive fear situation between the leader and the staff. So it's surprisingly at this day and age that it's still that case, and it might be different across sports, but predominantly in the sport I work in, football, soccer, I would say that still it is very much that way.
Well, okay. So you're saying it's still like a culture of fear, a culture of, to basically do what I say or else, for want of a better word. But like, what does that actually look like in a club? Like, what are the threats? Is it, you get deselected if I'm not going to pick you next week unless you play for my game plan. Is that the sort of thing? What does it look like?
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, as from a player perspective, very, very much. That if it's not done this way, which makes sense if you can't follow a game plan. But then there has been so often where I've sat with the leadership group and they're telling me that a player isn't doing what they need them to do. But where is the coaching in that? So they're not doing, and they haven't done what you need them to do. Do they understand what you want them to do, or is there a problem with the message? And then the next step is, well, why don't you bring them in rather than to chastise them, educate them? Like, I'm talking very common sense here, but this is frightening that this doesn't happen. And then also with the staff, it's exactly the same. But there's the fear, and fear creates, in my experience, groupthink and just agreeance with the leader, because if you don't agree with the leader, then you will be ostracized. And I see this time and time again in certain situations.
Where there's this like fear of retribution, or being, kicked out of the team, or having your contract cut if you're, a contractor, or getting kicked out, being sacked as the sports scientist or physio or whatever. So people will just sort of follow along for not wanting to rock the boat or upset the person making the decision.
Yeah, I've seen coaches tell staff that have come in to work for them that have a beard, that beard needs to go if you want to work here.
Okay. I can't see why that influences their success. Yeah.
Yeah. So the reason I bring that up is to show you that it's my way or the highway.
Yeah.
And we're in 2020, aren't we? So So we're not talking 1903. And that's the frightening thing. And then that expands out into so many areas of problems.
And like I want to hear about those sorts of problems, but at the same time, like I think there's another failure mode here, which is really slow. It's connected, which is like they call it sort of management by exception, but it's like it's not so much my way or the highway. It's like if you screw up, you're out. Do you know what I mean? But I'm not going to tell you exactly what that looks like in advance. It's like it's looking for mistakes and criticizing those mistakes and putting big stakes on those mistakes, but not exactly being clear about what you should be doing. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think, I mean, we were talking off air. I mean, I don't think enough organizations really know what performance is and do not know what they think their subordinates, what is good performance and not good performance. So there's no outline, there's no real KPIs, there's no goal, because what is performance? What do you do? Well, okay, I'm following these jobs, I've done that, but it's so subjective to say, well, are we doing that well? And this becomes more in sport, because I've even been in that situation as a sports scientist or, head of performance, where you might be under pressure because the results on the table are not going the right way. But hang on, we are doing this, and this. These are the KPIs of our job, but the results on the field aren't going the way. So then blame, of course, because you've got a culture, a negative culture, will turn in on itself, because the leader's going to do anything to protect themselves, because ultimately their ego is so large that they can't reflect on their own bias.
Yeah. So if the team isn't winning, then let's look for the ways to point the finger that aren't this way, that they're out that way. And often it might become the sports scientist or the sports psych or the physio, because the athletes are getting injured, not sort of paying attention to the sort of responsibility that maybe that leader has, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting enough, I saw a team, a franchise in a code that has failed to reach the finals for the third year in a row, after having a wonderful start to their life as a club.
Yeah.
So for the third time in a row, a big budget club has failed to reach the finals. And I was interested to see that they came out and said that there will be a review done and completed on what is going on. And the people involved in the review have been people that have been there for those 3 years. But let's review ourselves and we'll see what we come up with. And of course, we're not going to come up with, hang on, is there potentially that we're part of the problem?
Yeah, could it be my fault?
Yeah, could it be mine? And human nature is going to go, no, it's all out there. But come on, I can tell you, you're part of the problem. So do you want to tick a box to say to the fans and to shareholders that we're doing a review, or actually do you want to make a difference?
No, it's hard to see that there's a good faith attempt to actually get like a proper review of what's going wrong when, like, yes, you consult the people that are in charge. I can see the reasons why it'd be problematic to have them in charge of making the decisions and the recommendations.
Yeah, I'd like to know, in history, you might know, has anyone ever done a review of an organization and decided to sack themselves?
Look, I actually can't. Like, I could probably think of some political instances where people have like gone, I gave it a crack and I am resigning from my job. So I think, like, in the last Australian election cycle, you might remember that the leader of the Labor Party just basically said, look, I'm out. Like, I tried. And like people were going to criticize him anyway. And they did the external review that wasn't led by him. They, got other people to review the performance, and they said, well, he was part of the problem, but he wasn't leading that review. I think maybe only in politics, where you're just under so much like public scrutiny and in a way, you know, there's an expectation that you're going to go anyway. So I think he jumped before he was pushed. But I imagine in most sports organizations, that's not going to happen. You're not just going to like leave the club, you know, quit, or in a review say that you should be the first person to go, you know?
Well, absolutely, Michael, because then I think things like job security come into it,
Yeah.
financial pressures, think of myself, where am I going to work? That's all the thing. So, I mean, yeah, definitely. So going back to your original question, I think this is very common. And I think the students listening to this in their experiences as an athlete or maybe doing internships would see, hang on, there's a bit of fear associated here. And if you're feeling fear in the workplace, I think that's a good indicator that the leadership, there's a few problems there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You shouldn't, I guess, like, fear as a motivator is not sustainable, right? Like some people, like it, you know, when a tiger comes at you, it motivates you to get away, but you can only run so far, and it's just never something you want to have taking to bed each night.
Yeah, that's why a lot of these coaches that have that, that's their leadership style. They might have success initially because what it does is brings in discipline, but that success is short-winded. It's not for long-term sustainability. Yeah. So they might be successful and go from place to place, but all you need is the cracks starting to appear. If there isn't victory on the field, and then some people start standing up, you know, from inside, then there can be real problems. And how they handle that, because what they normally do, what I've seen is that they start to get rid of those people, but then it's a slippery slope.
And it's just, once you start picking people off, then everyone starts wondering if they're next, and that can create this extra cycle of fear, right?
It's just all walking around on eggshells.
So what's the alternative to this, Craig? Like today we're going to talk about transformational leadership, and you know, we'll walk through the different parts of the kind of ideas in that model and how they might apply to high performance situations. But like I'm wondering, like, you know, broadly, when you think about the opposite of that that transactional leader, that, you know, do what I say or else kind of leader, what are the key things that come to your mind that are kind of the antidote to that fear?
Well, they create trust by believing in the people that they've employed or the players that they're actually working with. You feel like that you have a voice and that you're valued. So that's the key. Remembering leadership is about having followers and influence. And if those followers that are following you, if they're following you not just because of your position, but because of who you are, I think that's very powerful. And the great leaders, and using these contexts, the transformational leaders, they believe in their people. That's the number one. People feel like they've got autonomy. There's value. I mean, every human wants to be valued, that they believe that they're making a difference. I believe people go to work, wherever it is, not to just earn an income. They want to be part of something bigger and better that's going to make the world a better place. I know that might sound nice and fluffy and optimistic, but I truly believe that. I mean, that's the workplace I want to go to. I mean, if we're thinking what a third of our life is related to actually being in the workplace, and the way life is these days, probably another third of that is thinking about the workplace or traveling and thinking. It's an enormous part of our life. So surely you would think most humans want to be doing something that's they're inspired to do. And that's what the transformational leader and that style is all about. And particularly in the high performance, if you want to be a high performing organization for a sustained amount of time, you're not going to get it with these transactional leadership styles. End of story. So yeah, I think it's vital that we start to move along the continuum of leadership.
Moving closer to this, and you're saying that there's quite a lot going in there, and I want us to unpack some of that. So you're sort of saying that these leaders will inspire people to pursue something bigger than sort of just their own sort of success, and they'll do that by showing sort of personal care for each individual person. They believe in their followers' ability to succeed, and they help sort of coach them along the way to get there.
Well, yeah, because what they're saying, it's a leader saying, okay, this is not about me, it's about us. So, I mean, this is the thing I never understand. A coach, say if we're talking a coach, or let's say a CEO that wants the organization to be successful, okay, whether that's on the field or in the stock market or wherever it is, they want them to be successful. All right. But they're not interested in the success of the individuals that are going to be there to help them get that success. See, even if you're not an empathetic leader and you don't believe in this, your personality is biased towards this transactional thing. Even if you're like that and you have that personality, but you want success, wouldn't it make sense that you go, hang on, but if I get these followers, even if I do it this way and they believe in what I'm going to do, we're going to have a better organization and ultimately I'm going to get success for me, even if you are about yourself. It's about making that connection going, hang on, I need the followers. The better the follower is, the subordinates are, the better these players are. If I help them to maximize their potential, ultimately I'm going to get success. Even if you're a narcissistic leader and that's all about you, you've got to be smart and go, hang on, if I believe in these people and make them better, my organization's going to be better.
Yeah. If I can improve the skills and the competence of every single member of the team, or that, and to use a metaphor, like if you get, every rower in the team going faster, harder and stronger, the boat's going to go faster, right?
Yeah. It's a great metaphor. Yeah, exactly right.
And I think sort of the next podcast will focus sort of probably a little bit more directly on that type of leader that's almost exclusive, not exclusively, but really heavily focused on that growing of like individual people and coaching them, being sort of it's called servant leadership, being their number two, right? Being there to help them thrive. But to sort of take that rowing metaphor again, I think one of the things you talked about, which was really useful to bring in with this transformational idea, is like having the vision for where we're going, right? So how do you get all of the rowers in the boat rowing in the same direction? They could be all really strong and really powerful rowers, but like the transformational leader will say, here's the vision, here's where we're all going together, and here's why that's valuable, and here's how this is going to help us, make that ding in the universe, right?
Yeah, and that's key. All right, so I think we need to servant leadership, authentic leadership, transformational leadership. Some of the old school people might say it's a bit soft. Let's really get away from that style of thinking, because the transformational leader, yes, we might say, oh, look, they care but caring sometimes is about being tough as well, right? Okay, so they're not a laissez-faire type leader, just do as you want and I want friends. And all I'm about is pleasing you. No, it's not. It's about having a clear vision, and that's why we start with that. And that has to be set by that leader, and then to pull everyone onto that vision so they can see it too.
Yeah, and look, I think that's a really, really important distinction. And it's not just like you said, do what you want. In fact, as we'll talk about soon, sort of having really high expectations for people is like critical in like getting everybody to thrive, right? It's not just like, what training do you guys want to do today? But like, let's talk about that vision, because I think that's important. And maybe like in sport, I don't know any really good examples of this being implemented, like I'm thinking of a recent COVID example where, I've talked about New Zealand before, and the Prime Minister was like, no, we're going to eliminate this, right? Like it was, the vision was like, we want to go back to a world where there's no COVID here, and we're going to totally shut it down so there's nothing. Or maybe Steve Jobs is famous for sort of having the goal of Apple being to put a ding in the universe, right? I guess what I'm wondering is like, what has been sort of, what do you think, do you know any examples where there's been like a good vision portrayed in sport where it's not just maybe win a grand final this year, like there's something a bit bigger than that,
Yeah, look, I think Ange Postecoglou with the Australian national team, when I was working with him in football, I think I would call him a visionary. That he didn't have a vision of just winning the games that we're involved in. He had a vision that Australia could be a world power in football. And that vision inspired people like me because you could see that would come. However, there are so many doubters that would think that would just call him delusional. So, because why could he say that? But working on the world scene in football, I could see, yeah, this is a possibility. So he had that vision. The problem is if you don't have support of that vision around it, if you're a coach, but then you've got other people around it and it's not supported, there comes a time where you go, you know what? If I don't have enough people on this vision, then I have to be out of here. If I don't have the support, then how can it work? Now, because it's like a CEO that has a vision, has a board of directors that go, we can't support that. So obviously it's the job of the visionary to try and get everyone's buy-in, but there also comes a time when you've got to go, hang on, this isn't working, and I'll go somewhere else where there might be more people that bought into it. So I definitely have seen someone that was beyond the results in the game. And then he's more recently with a Japanese team that I work with, a former assistant of Ange's, Pete Klomoski, who is an outstanding young coach, where I've spent time with him when he first came to this club that he's working with now. He had a vision, not just about this year or these games, but about to bring joy to the area that he was focused on, where this team is based. And I've seen that. So there are these transformational leaders, and they have, what I think they have, Michael? They have the belief, but they also don't have fear. See, a lot of these transactional leaders, they're based on fear.
Yeah.
If it doesn't go my way, then you're out, because they're fearful about their own reputation. Where the people like Ange and Pete, they're secure in themselves. They know that their vision can come true if people will work on it. But if it doesn't, and if they lose their job, so be it. It's not going to affect their self-esteem because they have the belief in themselves. That's what it is. Fear is paralyzing to so many leaders.
I can come up with a metaphor in a minute, but like it's almost like I'm thinking of I don't know if you've seen Alex Honnold. He's this like rock climber who climbed Half Dome without a rope, and like the previous record was like 3 days, and he'd managed to do it in like less than 3 hours.
Wow.
And like everyone's like, how the hell does he not sort of fear this? And what he did is he just had this vision of what he wanted to achieve, right? He wanted to be able to climb this massively impressive, face without ropes. And then he focused he didn't look down, like he didn't turn around and look at that massive fall. He planned really well and he practiced all the hard bits, but then he was looking, at the handholds in front of him at the path, right? And it sounds like what you're talking about, to link it back to leadership, is like a good leader has that vision for what they want, and they do the hard work, but they're also looking more ahead than they are looking at the massive risk of falling.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And let's be really clear here. These great leaders, these transformational leaders, and we'll go into some of these topics in a minute, they're well planned. It's not like I had a vision and we'll go about doing that. There's a lot of keys to that. What staff you have, what things you do in respect to looking at the detail. So the mountain climber you talk about, it's not like he is so much better than anyone else that climbed this mountain. But an enormous amount of detail has gone into this and how he's going to go about doing it. So I think we need to be clear, these transformational leaders, that's not a word to say that they're not really well organized and really well structured and have very good people around them. Like that's the other thing I find with great leaders, the transformational type leaders, the servant leaders. You know what they do? They recognize where they are weak, and they have staff that help those weaknesses.
Yeah.
So that are strong in those areas. So to make the whole package better. So it all gets back to, I know I talk about it a lot, but it gets back to ego and understanding yourself and being aware of your own limitations, your own bias. See, there's a big bias in our lives to basically like people that are similar to us, and to hire people that are similar to us, because you think, oh, that's the right way to be. What you've got to do is actually, you don't want more you a lot of the time.
People to fill the gaps that you can't do yourself, right? Like
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And like even I'll get back to when you and I did our journal, our book.
Yeah.
We have different skill sets. You're very creative and organized and focused, where I don't know why you needed me, actually.
But Craig, you were the one who had the vision. No, you were the one who had the vision.
Yeah.
And like, I think you also helped me buy into the goal, right?
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, is that like, without your vision, I wouldn't have done that. And I think the other thing which ties a lot of this together is, and you've mentioned this before, and I just want to kind of go into a bit of detail about how you do this, is that getting other people to sort of buy into the goal with you, right? So you talked about like, you can't just have the person who has a vision that doesn't have the team to support them, but also doesn't have the team like buying in and going in that same direction. And so in transformational leadership, they'll talk about, getting this group acceptance of goals as being like one of the sort of critical pillars. And I guess like what I'm curious from you is like, how do you do that? Like, how do you get people to buy your vision or sort of accept the goals that you might have?
Well, step one is to know what your vision is.
Right.
And to know what your goals are.
Yeah. Like
that. I know that sounds really simple, but how many people listening to this, do you have a vision for your life or goals for your life? Like, do you? Like, why are you doing this course? I mean, these are things that we need to do on a personal level in respect to self-leadership. And this comes back to, how do you get buy-in? First, you need to know what your vision is, and you've determined that on your own first, okay, before then you take it to a group. If you individually haven't bought into what you think you want to do, then how are other people going to buy into it? So I think that's key, Michael, that you actually are well set and believe in your own vision. Because if you're half-hearted in your own vision, like I've seen coaches say, I've seen coaches, it makes me laugh, because they sit there and say in news, yes, we are going to win. We will win well. We will beat our opposition, and we will do this. And the reason they're saying that is because they've been coached to say that, like positive voice that they think then transcends down to the team, because they go, oh, the coach is positive. But I laugh because you can see when they're saying it that they don't believe it.
Yeah.
They are saying it because a leadership type coach is actually saying to them, if you say these things, it might come true. Like, it's laughable. I mean, I want people to watch some of the news conferences of coaches and you go, hang on, do you believe what you're saying?
Well, and that's the funny thing, is like that their own internal BS detectors going off, right? Like they're like, and like mine does too sometimes when I say stuff that I just outlandishly know is just not going to happen. But like, I can't trick myself into believing that just by saying it. And what you're saying is that like they've almost sort of adopted this idea that if I tell myself and my players and the media enough that we're going to win and we're going to win well, it's going to happen. When what you're saying is you just like sincerely have to believe that or find something that you can believe in.
Well, I think there was one of these characters that I think he basically was telling coaches if they say it, you know, a number of times it will come true. I liken that to, you know, that I'd like to give that same coach, you know, some sort of bottle, and if you rub it, maybe the genie will. Like, I know this sounds ridiculous, but there's one very well-known coach that I mean, I would love to get the video of their news conferences, and I've sat there and gone, I mean, I actually laugh because I think you believe with what you're saying, because with what you're saying, if it doesn't come true, what's next? You know, like what's next? Because it's just funny. So if you can see it, and can I tell you, players know.
Yeah.
Players will know. Players will sit there and go, hang on, he doesn't believe this vision. How are we going to believe it? Yeah, so there's a very big difference when you see that come through. So it's very, very important.
And look, I can relate to what you're saying about coaches either not having this well formulated or not communicating it persuasively, or not having something that they can actually sort of put into words and believe themselves. Like, I mean, I have spent a bit of time trying to figure out what my vision for my career is, and I know that you have too. But I think like you're right. That is step one for leaders, is to clarify what they think their organization is hoping to achieve.
What's the purpose? And I say why a lot of people don't do it, because it's hard work. I mean, that's hard work. But if you do that hard work, and it doesn't happen overnight, if you do that hard work, then everything else will stem from there. But I think we really need to make that point. If you're not clear on your vision, getting followers, how can then you expect followers to buy into your vision?
Yeah. And then what? Then if you do have a clear vision, like, so, I don't know if it helps to have a concrete example. One of the visions that I've had written down, and I just brought it up, was like, I want to know what actually works to make the world a better place, not just like do the stuff that, might work. Like I want to know that the stuff that I'm trying to do to help make the world better is actually having an impact.
Well, you've got to quantify that. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
How would I get other people to buy into that? Like once you've got Ange saying we want to be a force in football in the globe, how do you get people to follow that?
Well, you have to have a map then about how you're going to be a force.
Right.
Because it's just not going to happen. That's a really nice statement for them to make. But then you have to have a map. What do we need to do to get there? And you've got to outline the steps to create that ultimate goal. So what you'd think is, and I remember Ange saying to me that, can we make our players the best players in the world? Well, maybe not. Is that in our control or not in our control? We're a multi-sport country, so we're quite different to a lot of the famous nations in soccer, where pretty much football or soccer is all they play. That's the goal. So, like, every Australian kid doesn't wake up in the morning and think, I want to play soccer for Australia. They might think, I want to play cricket. They might, like, if this is important to them, sport's important to them, they might think they want to play cricket. They might want to play rugby league for a team, or they might want to play rugby union. They want to play for the Wallabies, or they want to play for Australian netball, or so we're different, or swim,
or tennis, or AFL. Like there's so many sports. So
so we're multi-sport, and we should be proud of that. Every Australian doesn't wake up and think, okay, I want to play soccer for Australia. So what that means is, ultimately, we're not getting the best athletes, all right, because the pool is
thinner,
dispersed. And but what can we control? We can very much control that we will be the best off the field. We can control we will be the best prepared team. We will do the logistics, security, all these things, nutrition, everything. We can control that and be the best. Basically the best supporting off the field in anything that we can do. And then we can have the best coaching strategies, review of games, et cetera, et cetera. And then ultimately, if we funnel that down all the way through the nation, then we start to make progress and we start to be competitive on the world scale. That's how it is, because a lot of the great nations that have great success are not the best off the field.
They've just got such a big enough talent pool that they can rely on.
Yes, they're just very. I would actually go to say that, yeah, the enormous percentage of national teams are not that great off the field. They've just got this huge ability. Like put it this way, Australia played France in the World Cup. When I was with Australia in 2018, working with Australia, I would say not one of our players would maybe make the 5th national team of France.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, no, and that's no disrespect to the players.
Yeah, they've got 65 million people and they've got a much smaller number of sports that people play, and so they've just got like an incredible talent pool. But what you're saying is that we make up for that in some other areas.
Yeah, so they won the World Cup, but in that game, it was 1-1 and they scored in the 84th, 85th minute to win that game 2-1. So how does that happen? Well, we're well prepared, well coached, players know their jobs, and in actual fact, in the documentary that they did on the French national team, the team talk after that, basically the coach said, look at this data. It was like Australia had an extra player and we had similar possession. So they said they ran 10 kilometres more, like he was having a go at his team. So there are other ways in respect. But Ange wasn't coaching us then because he'd left, but he had that vision. We bought into that vision, and
and like what you're saying there really aligns with two of the key things here. Like, so you're saying one of the ways to get acceptance of those sorts of goals and that vision is to clearly map out what it's going to look like, because without that, then it does look like a pipe dream, right? It does look like this sort of statement that just you're throwing out there without like a realistic plan. But once I know as a follower what the plan is and I buy into that, and it is within my control, then I feel like I know what steps I'm taking and I know what my role is within that, and it seems achievable, right? So that's number one. But number two is I like the way you talked about like really setting the bar high on the things that are within your control. So, we can't have the best talent pool because we don't have 65 million people all playing one sport, right? We've got smaller population and more sports, but like, let's be the best at this, and this, right? And set the bar really high and lay out the plan to help people get there. And that sounds like a really beautiful combination of like a whole lot of transformational leadership principles.
Yeah, and absolutely. Look, I think, Ange is a very intelligent person as well, and that studies leadership. Like, an interesting thing about leadership is how much training have leaders had in leadership. Like if we were to do a quick survey of coaches presently coaching professionally in Australia right this moment, how many of them do you think would fully understand transformational leadership?
Yeah, I probably would not want to be too disparaging, but I think that a lot of them could benefit with a little bit more help. And even choosing this as a model, the reason why I've chosen to sort of focus on this with you, Craig, is because there's a meta-analysis, which I'm going to put in this, which has the lists of outcomes, positive outcomes from transformational leadership. And the positive outcomes take up an entire page in the paper, and it's drawn on 400 studies. And it says that a lot of things like authentic leadership, and they've got another one, which is ethical leadership.
Yeah.
That actually those three things, it's almost like the ethical and the authentic part are subsumed under a good definition of transformational. Yeah. So I actually want to come to that because, you've talked a lot about authenticity, and one of the actual core principles of transformational leadership is being a good role model and inspiring leader through your own behavior. And I think that sounds like what you're talking about when you talk about authenticity and authentic leadership. But am I on the right page that you sort of see that there?
Yeah, absolutely. Like how I think this is really key. And I think if you're in a leadership position, people have to understand when they are in a leadership position that they're being watched at all times. And even if you're a parent, Michael, you'll start to see this with your young son. They watch, and so they're watching to see, do the words match the actions. And I've seen this. I've seen the words come out in a team meeting about working together as a team. We're a team playing group and that sort of stuff. And then those same coaches go from that meeting and say, player X, Y, and Z are rubbish. Yeah, I don't even know why we chose them. Or that to me is not authentic, is it? Because one of the things about a transformational leader is that they want every person that they are leading to buy into what they want them to do, and then they're interested in those people becoming better. So when you see that language behind the scenes, out in front, because remember, I'm a follower, aren't I? I might be advising the leader, or I might be working for the leader, but then you think, hang on, if they're saying that about their player, are they also saying that about the staff when you walk out of the room? So these are key things with authenticity that we need to be aware of. It's the same thing about leaders that act a certain way but do. I mean, that's a classical transformational leadership point, isn't it? That they basically do lead by example rather than just speaking the words. That there is an example there how they conduct themselves.
And you've seen some examples of that where that hasn't gone so well, where there's this really stark contrast between sort of the voice of, team togetherness and respect and all that sort of stuff, and then, speaking really poorly of players in a way that they would never say that if the player was in the room, right? Like that there's almost these two personas, and it really makes it hard to see that as like an authentic.
Yeah, and you know what? Even for me, there's been people I've worked with where I've seen this, and I don't know why I haven't put the numbers together. I've seen this time and time again, them conduct themselves.
Yeah.
And then it sort of just then dawns on me, I don't know, it's just because I've got older or whatever, where I go, you know what, I'm not going to be part of that. And it hasn't happened overnight. It might have been, I've worked with these coaches for years, and then I just go, because then you really start, you can't buy into it, Michael. And then when you can't buy into it, I think I need to say this. If you're a follower and you can't buy into the leader, you got to get out. Yeah. Because you're not going to do anyone a good service. You're better off to go, you know what, this is not for me. Good luck. Off you go. But get out of there, because if you're there white-anting the leader, I cannot ever have any respect for that. I don't care how bad the leader is. You just cannot be there.
Well, it's very difficult to be authentic. And like, I mean, I've felt the pull of this in multiple areas, like where I've been on both sides. One, I've had like a leader who I might struggle to sort of be inspired by, and might feel the pull to white ant, as you said, because everyone wants to kind of to bitch about the things that are really making their job difficult. And if that's your boss, it's actually really difficult to hold that back. And at the same time, like I've had people who have worked for me who, like, I have really struggled with their performance, and I felt like I've had to kind of vent. But at the same time, I know that both of those examples are not like inspiring from me. I know that they would have the effect on the people I'm bitching to of them doubting kind of my integrity, and that if it ever got back to like the people that I've worked for or my boss, right, if it went either one of those directions, that would be like really destructive. So like I'm trying to empathize with the fact that like it is a sort of I think a human impulse to want to to bitch, for want of a better word, right? But at the same time, it is such a destructive behavior from like a leadership perspective, right?
Yeah, and look, I agree with you, Michael. It's not like, oh, yeah, I really struggle in that area with people. What I would advise is that you have a good support network at home, or a friendship group that mightn't be around that group that you're actually working with, or that leader that you're working with. And then we all need to speak, and then the feedback you will get from a trusted friend or mentor will really help you in that situation. Because yeah, otherwise you're just going to make yourself look really bad.
Yeah, and then you're not relying on, well, you're not risking the potential damage that it could do by taking that.
And sometimes it might be your bias getting in the way. So, you know, you need that, like if we always imagine, if we're working somewhere, we've got a very narrow view. We're in it. But then you sometimes need someone that's got the outside view. Yeah. And when they see the outside view, they might be able to say some things or ask questions that might open you up to realize that you're just stuck. And I think it's very important. That's why you have mentors and you have a network of trusted advisors.
Yeah.
It's very, very important.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And it actually does remind me of times when, like what we talked about earlier once about, you know, sometimes the person who's sort of managing you doesn't have to be your source of inspiration and your leader, right? And like sometimes they're different people, in the same way that you don't have to be the even if you're not in a management position, you can do everything we've talked about so far. Like you can have a vision for your career or for the team, even if you're not in charge.
Yeah.
Which actually links to the next sort of component. And you touched on this really early on, but I just want to circle back, because a lot of that stuff that we've talked about so far is very much this like leading from the front of the pack kind of imagery for me. Like, you know, setting a goal, being a good role model, having a vision, laying out a plan, like all of that you could sort of do, I don't know, by a podcast, right? Yeah. But there's another part that you can't neglect, which is this like individual personal care and consideration, right? And so I'm wondering how leaders balance this. How do they balance that sort of wanting to lead by being a good role model out front and setting a vision and a plan, but also want to like individually support people, have empathy, like use, you know, respect their feelings. How do you do both?
Oh, well, I think firstly we have to appreciate that that's vital if you want to get a high-performing organization. That right. People identify, research has shown that leaders that are interested, okay, or I suppose workers that know that their leadership or their organization is interested in them, are going to be much more aligned with the vision of the organization. So you can't stand out in front and say all the right things and be this transformational, charismatic leader, and then not have any interest in the people that you're actually leading, because that gets back to authenticity. That isn't right. The empathetic leader that understands what people are going through in their organization or in their team, and is really interested in that other person, just that is willing to have those conversations, is interested in their health, their family, all these things that are going on, is going to get a much more powerful follower and more productive person. It's research has shown that. I'm just not making that up. So, I mean, I think in anything, when we know, we need to be aware that's vital. And if they're not your good skills, if you aren't empathetic, if that doesn't come naturally to you, that you find it difficult, I mean, they're things that you can work on. Again, I will say this because I think it's important. If your overall goal is yourself getting ahead, and you're listening to this and going, oh, that's very nice, but I'm just not empathetic, all I care about is myself. Well, what I'm telling you is you will be more successful if you do this. Just think your own success. If you want to be selfish, be interested in people. let them know that you care. They're going to be very, very important steps for you to get your overall outcome. I mean, you need to respect. You want to create an environment where people feel like they have a voice. You're only going to do that if you believe that their voice is important.
So if you can create a sense that it's safe for me to speak and my voice is valued, then you're going to get more investment, right, in the process, in the vision, in the goal. If I feel like my contribution to the goal is valued and you care about my role in that team, I'm going to buy into your vision much more effectively than if you're just like plonking it out there and expecting me to come along for the ride.
Like, Michael, have you had an experience where people are saying all the right things, but you've seen your voice is not being heard?
Yes, I can think of some examples of that. Yep.
Because this is the funny thing. People know this literature. Like people in leadership, I said that a lot wouldn't know this, but say in an organization, they know this is the right way to go. All right. But still, I could have been in organizations where they know transformational leadership, they know having an organization that's interested in the people and all that sort of stuff is the right way to go. But still, the authenticity isn't there because you can see it's just tick the box.
Yeah.
And they're not really interested in your voice. They're not. Like, I'll give you an example. It might be something where, a board or a chairman or something like that realizes, he has to hear the people, or the CEO of a big organization has to hear the people or the workers. So they have these dates where they go out and people can meet the CEO. If I'm talking big organizations.
Yeah.
But then people ask questions but they're not really listened to or they're not answered. I think a lot of people can resonate with that. So then you go, okay, I'm just part of a machine. They're not really interested in me. People are smart.
Yeah. I can think of some examples like that and it's really disheartening. Like I can remember asking a question in a situation like the one you just said, and the leader who was in charge of the whole organization was like, look, that's a great example. It's right in line with our values. It sounds perfect. Send me an email. And I did, and I didn't get a response. So I followed up and I didn't get a response. And I followed up with a couple of other people who were sort of further down the hierarchy. And they were like, oh yeah, we'll send it up the chain. And then eventually I heard a little thing just privately via email going, look, it's not a priority right now. And just like that experience was just incredibly disheartening. Not only because like they'd really like said the right things in public, because that was, they were on a show and my suggestion was, or question, it was a question, was just perfectly kind of aligned with our values, right? But then to see the like a very different side of things kind of privately, and like a very long protracted experience of trying to just get an answer to what I thought was a fairly simple question.
Yeah. And that happens. Like you see coaches do that. Yeah. Okay, Craig, what do you think? Michael, what do you think? Ben, what do you think? Good, thank you. We'll do it this way.
Yeah, right. And there's not like a validation of Mike and Craig's or Dan's perspective, right? Yeah. I think it's good that we've kind of connected with both of those. And I guess the metaphor I like for this one is it's kind of like you've got this Rubik's Cube, and it's hard for leaders to keep their vision on all sides of the cube at once, right? Like it's hard for them to be looking at the values, the goals and getting everybody on board and being a good role model at the same time as also kind of taking care of individual concern. And so what we have to do is kind of rotate our focus. That's one of the reasons why I think it's hard. And that's probably also why, like you said, some leaders will know cognitively that they're supposed to, that it's beneficial to do all of these things, but that they might only focus on a couple or none of them at all because they put the cube aside or they're only looking at one side of it.
Yeah, and I think that gets back to like the transactional leader is also often this is just my experience, I don't have any literature to back this up, a control freak.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they don't trust, right? So they don't trust, where you would hope a transformational leader is more trusting, hiring good people, that even though they've got the Rubik's Cube and looking around it, but they've got people that are focused on each side of that Rubik's Cube, because that's their job, that then lead into you and giving you that information.
Yeah.
So the transformational leader will have trust in the staff to give them that information that they need. So because if we put a Rubik's Cube right in front of us right this moment, can we see all sides of that cube? No, we can't.
Yeah, you can't. And that's why you need people to take care of the other side, right? People to...
Yeah. So even though you can't see all sides of it, ultimately you're going to get that intelligence has to be fed into you, so the cube gets to where we need it to go.
That's great, Craig. That's a good balance. Look, there's one last thing here, which I'm not sure if it applies to the athlete side of sport, but it might apply to, sports leaders integrating their other, their professional staff, or that, their sports science team, or even their marketing department, but whatever. So maybe think of this more broadly, but one of the core components of transformational leadership is this idea of intellectual stimulation. So it's basically giving people challenges to think for themselves, or to rethink the way that they're doing things, to challenge their own biases, like we talked about last week. And I guess my question to you is, how much does this matter in a high performance sport environment? Or is intellectual stimulation, is that process of sort of challenging your own thinking, maybe not as important in this environment?
I think it's absolutely vital, and I don't think there's enough of it. Because it gets back down to the leadership, that do they even want this to happen? Are there robust discussions? And so many people in if I talk sport, so many people, I don't know if it's our education process, and I'm talking to our fraternity here. We see the world in black and white. It's such a narrow view of the world, where I would have things vastly different. We need to take a holistic view of the world, ultimately to get to where we want to get to, which is our players performing to their maximum. So I need that challenge, that there are different ways, because otherwise we will never advance. I don't think people think like that. I think they look at it from a sports science or strength and conditioning point of view, and they're biased. They don't even recognize the bias that they have. And then it's the same with physiotherapy and other aspects of sports medicine. So it goes away, rather than sitting back and going, oh, hang on, can we challenge ourselves here and think about this differently? And me, Michael, I spend a lot of time would ask you questions, and I ask engineers questions and other people questions, and think, how do they solve problems? Well, that's how we can solve problems. And different areas, like stand-up meetings, rather than these crazy long-term meetings where people sit down. How is that meeting conducted? Is it a meeting where just stuff needs to be distributed? We'll distribute it. We don't need to sit down and have this meeting. Let's have stand-up meetings, be agile in how we focus on things. Have you ever heard of a sporting organization talk about a scrum? That's very common in IT. And
not in a meeting sense, but the irony of it is it came from rugby union, right? But the idea, but yeah, you're right. And I guess it comes back to that old saying, if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll keep getting what you always got.
And that's sport. Has sport really advanced?
Not as fast as a whole lot of other areas. Well, Craig, given everything we've sort of talked about with transformational leadership, and we're sort of coming on to time for this part, do you have any sort of final calls to action or recommendations for people trying to develop these skills?
Yeah, look, if you're not even in a leadership position at the moment, you are, because you need to lead yourself. So start with yourself, okay? Because everything here, if you do not have good self-leadership, I believe this with every leader I work with, if there's not good self-leadership, they can't effectively long-term lead people. Look at some of these things that we've actually been talking about. You need to be very clear in your mind. You need to understand yourself. You need to understand your bias. You need to work on you. And so the foundation of that is that you need to be physiologically and psychologically healthy. So they're important. I mean, that's key, because we're asking you to do a lot of things. You need to be thoughtful, empathetic, to monitor your bias.
Have a long-term vision, have high standards, all that stuff.
What, you think you're going to do that if you're getting 3 hours sleep a night and drinking alcohol and smoking 100 cigarettes and eating McDonald's on the way home because you've got no balance in your life?
Yeah.
So I think this is something that's not taught enough. That very much we need to be focused on self-leadership. That's the first step in being a good leader. So I'd say that's very important. Also to question and to observe people that are leading.
Right.
Observe what you're seeing now. Not to be critical, but to realize we all have it in us. We all have this dark leadership shadow that will take us back to the 1900s, where we want to hit people with a stick and go, you do as I say, or I'm going to fire you. I'm telling you, I lead people and I constantly think that that's what I want to say. And I have clear vision of one time where I had 5 people doing a job and something happened. And I think I told them all to go away because I can do it all myself and do it better. It's frightening, Michael. I think that was 10 years ago. I remember doing it clearly. So to think that I'm this visionary, nice sort of leader, I have it in me to actually say ridiculous things like that. So I think we need to be very aware of that, and then even see it in others, and to see, okay, is this going to work or not work? I think we need to practice these things in our everyday life.
So, and what you're saying there is that first, if you want to work on these things and be a great leader, then see how you can apply them in your life straight away and lead yourself.
Yeah.
And sort of connected to that, like, try to bring this in wherever you can. And if you are going to use this sort of lens to critique a leader that you know, that can be a really helpful process. And it's often easier to find holes in other people's behavior than it is in your own. But that's where the second step comes in, or the third one really, is to say, well, like, if you're noticing an impulse, like a leader's impulse to rule with the carrot and a stick, then turn that sort of back onto yourself and sort of notice that impulse in you, and have that awareness, because that's how you're going to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Because whether you don't think it or not, we're all in some form of leadership position right now. But if you are going to lead a high-performance organization, these are key things that we've discussed today that will be success, will help with that success. Just in saying that, one final thing, I think it's always a balance, that we will have times where we have to be strong. We have to be strong. And there has to be that situation where it is you saying it needs to be done like this now. And that's okay. But remember that you just know why you're saying that, when you're saying it, and when that is needed. So I think if we always think leadership is like having, a toolbox, and we need to pull out different strategies for different times, I think that is something we need to be aware of.
You need to still have that tool for providing structure in there, and combine it with all the other tools.
I suppose we can just make sense of that with a bit of an analogy. If we're in a situation where, if we had a young child with us and they were going to run out onto the street in front of a car, we'd be not asking for a discussion then.
Yeah. We don't sort of we don't bring in the vision for like, oh, I'd really like it for you to make it till you're 25.
Because you do know, that's why you're the leader, that's why you're the parent. You're going to go, no, get away and take them. And that's the same with leadership in an organization. There's going
And
to be
that's
times where people are, you know, going to run out in front of a car, and it's not you to be this, oh, okay, let's see how you recover from that.
and that was where me sort of trying to objectively look at the data was surprised by something, and it supports exactly what you're saying. Is that in my head I'd seen it as this dichotomy: you're either a transformational or a transactional leader, and I thought the more transactional you were, the worse you would be as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because like the data didn't fit that model of the world. What it said is that yes, more transformational leadership is always better, but some transactional leadership is necessary, right? Like in a sense that you need to have some structure and control for the times when you've got a kid running onto the road, metaphorically, right? Yeah.
It's a great point, Michael. I know we're going to finish, but it's a really great point. In everything that we do, we can't see things in that black and white, one way or the other. We can't see it like that, because then we're going to be, and now we're saying transactional leadership, transformational leadership is wonderful, okay? But at times, because if we're going all that way on the continuum from transactional, we're just as bad in some respects as people that are extreme the other way. Extreme in any part of life is a problem.
That's a really good place to put it, Craig, because I guess what we've found is that most coaches already have this tool in their toolbox, you know, which is that transactional leadership. So let's add this other set of tools that we've talked about today, and I think most leaders will really help their team thrive on a want to achieve this vision rather than this fear of getting basically booted out of the team. So I think hopefully as a result of this conversation we'll be a little bit more towards that end, and I love the call to action. I think we should all, I'm going to have a think about how I can be more like this.
Great.